Alrighty, boys and girls, it's your main math man, Mr. Shank, coming to you live from Walker Grant Middle School, and we're going to continue this idea of these composite shapes, and let's kind of break it down into different ways that we have. And so again, we're not working with area. So in the other videos, we were working with perimeter, and so when we're doing that, our units were in first degree, meaning only one dimension was being used. And so now if we're talking about area, this means that we're going to have units to the second power. Again, we're going to have units to the second power because we're going to be now multiplying. All right, so we're going to say, what's going to be area? So it's going to be so what is area? Well, it's the amount of space, a shape or figure takes up. Okay. And again, you want to say that maybe, the space, or you could say the amount of distance that is covered. And you're talking about the shaded. Again, you're talking about the shaded amount that is inside a shape. Okay, so before we were talking about a perimeter, and so if I had a square, I'm talking about those lines on the outside. If I'm talking about the area, I'm talking about all of this shaded in the center. Okay, so just keep those ideas in your head. Again, if you have had this before, which if you made it past 5th grade, you should have. And so it says how to calculate area. Well, very simple. You just multiply the dimensions, and use the appropriate formula. And you want to make sure that you're maybe using that updated formula sheet, appropriate formula for yourself. All right. And so, again, you want to keep this idea in your head so that way you can add those correctly. And so, again, when we're talking about dimensions, we're talking about let's say another word for dimensions, you could say are attributes. And so that would be like, for an example of what the word attribute means, it'd be, Mr. Shank is this tall and he weighs this much. So those are descriptors that you can measure. All right, so maybe we can come up with a solid definition of the following words. So what does the word composite mean, just in general? And so maybe let's say when two or more objects are combined. Again, we have had that word before, combined, where we're combining like terms, but composite, again, notice how it has that first prefix in it. And so when two or more objects are combined to form one item. Okay, so let's just keep this in our head. Again, we're talking about something that we're adding together. So what's a shape? Again, that's a figure, so you could say an object or figure, or maybe even picture, whatever you want to call it. Again, it's just those polygons that we have that has defined values for its dimensions. So that means that you have to be able to have those values specifically for, let's zoom in a little bit and make sure we get all this. All right. it's saying, if you're given a picture, you need to be able to find it, or you get to have it given already. So now let's put those words together. So again, a compound word is two words separately, and when you put them together, you can have another formed word. And so using that idea, so we're going to now combine the definitions. Meaning we're going to add composite and we're going to add shape together to get composite shape. So again, composite plus shape. Well, what does that mean? Again, it's going to be when two or more objects, figures, pictures, polygons, any of those words, maybe let's say polygons, when two or more polygons are added together. Okay? And so again, that's all we're doing for this. Again, we're combining shapes to see it. All right, so let's give it a good example for this. All right, so in this, again, I'm going to be drawing several pictures. They're not going to be perfect, but as long as they are close, that's what you're looking for. All right, so I'm going to draw, my first shape is going to be an arrow. So I'm going to say my first shape is going to be an arrow. What does that look like? Well, it's not going to be the normal lines that we're talking about. I'm going to be using a solid looking arrow here. So we have this, kind of comes out. You usually see this when you're going around a turn on the road or something like that. It kind of gives you a warning saying, hey, we're going this way now. All right. And so the idea that we want to have is what happens when we break it apart. So this is going to be the key idea that we have, meaning when we are breaking it apart, that means we are subdividing it. Subdividing. All that's saying is we're taking each of the parts and splitting them into our normal shapes that we can calculate. That way it's a little bit easier to solve. And so what kind of shapes can we split this apart into? Well, maybe if I make a nice easy cut right here, again, the dashed line is a cut, so dashed line is a cut. And I'm not taking out scissors and I'm not cutting it, but it's just the idea of being able to break it apart. So an arrow would be, let's say, a rectangle plus a triangle. So we have two polygons added together. And so, well, how do we do that? Well, what do we need for a rectangle? Well, you need the length and the width. And then what would you need for the triangle? Well, you probably need this space in here, which would be your height. Okay? And so, well, how would we find the area? Well, so we would have the area of the arrow is the sum of the area of the rectangle. Again, we use the word sum when we're adding, and so it's the area of the rectangle plus the triangle. Rectangle and triangle. So again, all you have to do is separate those two, use the formulas that you have, and then add those two together. So again, using that formula sheet, we can kind of figure out what we need. So maybe if you want to, you can use a highlighter, you can use different colors. I personally like to either label my shapes or use different colors. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to say that, let's go with go with this. So I'm going to say the area of the arrow, so the area of my arrow, that's going to be in blue. So that's this entire amount in here, okay? And now, if I'm talking about the area of my triangle, the area of my triangle, how do we do that? Well, it's this part here. So we have our part in green is going to be our area in a triangle. What do we need for that? Well, we have 1/2 times the base times the height. Again, this is still using your formula sheet that you have, and very simply use those dimensions. And well, what happens if we have h, because it would be this distance here, but what about our base? Well, you could use, for this, let's use our length that we have already here, use L for our base. That way, we keep it simple. So now, let's have our second part, which would be the area of the rectangle. So the area of our rectangle. Well, what's that going to be equal to? Well, it's talking about this space in the middle here, okay? And so, again, it's only this rectangle that we're talking about, which very simply is just the length times the width. And so how do we put these together? So if we're talking about the area of the arrow, again, the area of the arrow would be something like this. Well, it would be 1/2 times the base times the height, which we have here. And then it would be, we're going to add that to our length times our width, which is the area of our rectangle. So again, the area of our arrow is that amount shaded in blue. This is one way of doing it. Again, I'm going to give you multiple options as always, but you'll need to at least pick one of them. So now, moving to the back, let's try to maybe do a couple more clear examples. So let's say if we do, what about this? What if we do, given a shape, maybe let's draw, what would a pencil look like? What would a pencil look like? Well, it would have, you know, your eraser at the top. Again, it's not going to be perfectly drawn, but you guys will get the idea. Let me draw it actually a little bit bigger for you guys. All right, so we have our pencil here, and again, that's going to be our eraser. We have that middle part, and we're going to have that point for ourselves. All right, so a nice, decent pencil, nice and sharp for ourselves. And so what shapes, well, do you see? Well, I kind of see a rectangle, I see a triangle, and then I see half of a circle. So that's going to be a semicircle. So let's have it's a semicircle. Semicircle. It's going to be added to a rectangle plus a triangle. All right. And you're probably wondering, well, how am I going to find this area of a semicircle? Well, a semicircle is just half of a circle, so you just divide it by 2. So let's kind of see what we have here. Another way I did this last year that a lot of people were thankful for was I did use those colors, but I kept it a little bit less messy. So let's do it like this. Let's use this guy. Alright. What I did last year was, as I label these, so I identified my shapes, I labeled the shapes, and so let's say we have our semicircle, let's have this be X, let's have our rectangle be, y, and let's have our area of the triangle be z. Again, this is another way to do it. I kind of like this way because it's a little bit clearer to see. Alright, so again, what we're going to do is kind of break this apart. We identify the shapes. We want to redraw the shapes. And so I have our semicircle is going to be x, our rectangle, and again, well, let's see here. Our rectangle is going to be y, and then our triangle is going to be z. All right. So we label the shapes, redrew them. Well, let's find the area for each of them. So how do we do that? Well, the area, so I'm going to say A, again, the area of our semicircle is going to be equal to, well, what's the area of a circle? Well, it's going to be pi times r, which is pi r squared. And since we only have half of a circle, we're going to have to divide that by 2. Okay? Then we're going to have the area of, let's keep this blue. That way it's a little bit easier. So we have area of our, again, semicircle, pi r squared. And since it's semicircle, we divide it by 2. All right, so now, again, we still use that same idea for our rectangles that we did before. So the area of our rectangle is going to be equal to, well, it's just the length times the width, still just like before. And then let's say for our triangle, and we labeled that as z, we're going to have that as 1/2 times the base times the height. So again, make sure that you're having each of these ideas for yourself. So again, we separated them, and so we would say the area of this pencil, so the area of this entire pencil is these three added together. And so you could say the area of x plus y plus z, again, our three shapes, is going to be these three added together. And so, again, usually I like to just calculate these one at a time and then just add those values. Put it in general. This is what it's going to look like. Let's say that maybe if you calculated it and you got, let's say you got 25.12 units. Let's say for this general example, we said this is inches squared. Let's say we have a rectangle that had 15 inches squared, and let's say when we got that last part, our triangle, let's say it was about 7 inches squared. And so what that means is you have to add these three together. So it would be 25.12 plus 15 plus 7. Again, making sure you do that quick math. You'd be at, let's do 47.12 inches squared. Again, all you're doing is these steps. Identify your shapes, label your shapes, redraw the shapes, find the area of each, and find the sum of all your areas.